We will first take the most theologically weighty questions. Father John, have you ever considered running for president? No, but several times lately I've considered running after the president. Who designs your outfit? Omar the tent maker. I've been asked about our communion and why it isn't symbolic. Can you help me answer this question that is understandable to a non-Catholic? Well, the answer is our communion is symbolic, but not merely symbolic. It is symbolic, but not only symbolic. It's more than symbolic because it's sacramental. What is a sacrament? A sacrament is a sign which effects what it signifies. Is it a sign? Yes, that can mean symbolic. It's a sign, it points to something. But is it only a sign? Is it just any kind of sign? No. It's a special kind of a sign. It is a sense-perceptible sign which effects what it signifies. Okay, so you can answer, yes, our communion, which is a sacrament, the Eucharist, it is symbolic, certainly. It indicates, it symbolizes union with the Christ we receive, but it is not only symbolic, it actually makes happen what it symbolizes. It effects what it signifies. So, sure, it's symbolic, but it's not only symbolic, it's much more than symbolic. It's sacramental. Here's one that'll get me in trouble for sure. By faith, we reject everything that is opposed to it, number 2088. By faith, we, quote, reject everything that is opposed to it. If we have children's catechisms in our CCD program that we are not using because they contain errors against the faith, should these books be donated to a needy mission or destroyed? What did the needy mission ever do to you? Now, I am not suggesting you go about destroying property, especially church property. However, there was once a mysterious bonfire in the back of the seminary where I attended, not because the seminary had bad books, but because certain parishes that some of the seminarians taught CCD in had bad books. And lo and behold, many of those books disappeared one year. I don't have any idea what happened to them, but they disappeared. How do you respond to a Jehovah's Witness that knocks on your door? I smile very broadly at him, and I say, "Come right in, brother." I love to talk to them. I once had 13 Mormons in the priest house where I lived in Spain. These very old, very straight-laced Spanish priests. They don't understand those things at all. But this whole battalion of Mormon missionaries showed up in the little town of Villalba, where I lived, outside of Pamplona. And I was walking down the street, and here they came. You know what they look like. They were, very squeaky clean, nice boys from Utah, and they had their black pants, their white shirts, and their black neckties, and they were carrying the Book of Mormon and a Bible, and there were 13 of them, all lined up. And this is Spain, not a big city in Spain, a little tiny town in Spain. And I had my clerical attire on, and I stopped and said, "Well, boys, what part of Utah you all from?" And they looked, and we struck up a conversation, and they were very likable. I really liked them. And I invited them to the house where I lived. It's like a rectory. And we met many times. I would say we met, well, at least a half a dozen. And they brought even more of their group in, and they asked all kinds of questions. Now, I was never quite sure if they were sincerely trying to learn what we believe, or if they were just trying to, figure out what we believe so they could use it against us. And they told me at the end of the year, I got to know them pretty well, and I liked them, and I was kind to them, and they were kind to me. And at the end of the year, I said, well, boys, you've been out, they work 6 days a week, 12 to 16 hours a day. Can you imagine the dedication if we did things like that? Amazing, absolutely amazing. And I asked them, well, boys, you've been working this territory a full year, very hard. How many conversions you get? None. That part of Spain, the province of Navarra, is the most Catholic part of Spain. And there wasn't a single church other than a Roman Catholic church in the entire province. Now, that didn't mean everyone was perfect Catholics, and certainly other churches were allowed. You could, if you could get people to go to them. A priest there explained to me, though, what happened to one of the Mormons who knocked on a particular door one day, and the elderly Spanish woman came to the door, and he began to give his spiel, and he said, now you should join the Mormon church. And she looked at him and didn't blink an eye. They're like Prussians, the northern Spaniards. They're rather unemotionless. And she looked at him and she said, I have the one true faith, and I don't practice that. Why should I switch? She was honest. All right, I better get to some serious things here. And by using words like lucky, is that in a sense a sin against the first commandment? Well, I wouldn't say it's a sin, unless you believe that everything is somehow luck or coincidence. Obviously we don't want to deny the providence of God, that things are in God's providence. God influences events. I wouldn't say that it's a sin. By acknowledging a power other than God's, well, it depends on if that's what you mean by it. Certainly if you meant something there's a power other than God's power that's ultimately and absolutely in charge of the universe, well, then maybe. A young couple in our parish is trying to have a family. When they told me they are going to try in vitro fertilization, I told them it wasn't good because it is created in a lab. I've read it doesn't have a soul and so forth. Well, it's basically against the moral teaching of the church. It goes right to the basis of human love. It goes right to the basis of married love. You cannot separate the procreative from the unitive dimensions of married love. The sexual act is an expression of the interior love which the spouses have for each other. That expression of love, that mutual self-donation of love, can never be artificially separated from the procreative dimension of the marital act. That is intrinsically disordered to do that. And so the basic reason is that it is actually, now it's hard to answer these things in 1 or 2 minutes, but it separates what God has made one. Sex isn't just sex. Sex isn't just for procreation, nor is it just for the mutual benefit of the spouses. It's for both together. And you can't separate the unitive, coming together, the love, from the procreative dimensions. And once you do that, things begin to break down. Things begin to deteriorate in the marriage. Dying with dignity. Some consider taking a patient off oxygen as dying with dignity. Okay. The whole question of ethics, the right to die business. Dying with dignity is something everyone has a right to. Dying with dignity is dying in a state of grace at the exact moment God decrees that you die. That's dying with dignity. It is not dying with dignity when we decide to play God, when we decide we will stop hydration and food for someone. We can't play God. Now, it's true that it can be a brutally painful thing to watch a loved one slowly die. I have great sympathy for that situation. It is so painful to look at that. It is so very painful. But remember what our authentic human dignity consists in. It consists in our personhood. Being human persons is where our dignity comes from. Living in a state of grace elevates human dignity to a supernatural dimension, to live as children of God. Now, God is a provident Father. God knows what's best for us. And you might say, but the suffering is so bad. I don't want to give a trite answer, but once again I have to say, look at that crucifix. If you want to know what your destiny is, you must look at the crucifix. And I'll tell you what, if you want to try to get out of that, forget it. Forget it right now. You're not getting out of it. If you are a Christian, you're called to live the life of Christ. If you are a Christian, you're going to die the death of Christ. Dying, he destroyed our death. Rising, he restored our life. That's the way the Master went. That's the way we have to go. That suffering takes many forms. We are to alleviate human suffering every way possible. Absolutely. Medicine is magnificent. I think doctors, like parents or teachers, have a magnificent calling to alleviate human suffering. What a blessed vocation, to make people well, to heal. Oh, it's a great thing. But you don't want to pervert that which is in itself a blessed calling. One who is called to preserve life, to enhance life, to improve the quality of life, is not to deteriorate and become God, who decides subjectively and arbitrarily when life begins or when life ends. God does that. And it is when we usurp the authority which is for God alone that individuals and societies get in big trouble. So what's the basic rule? From the first moment of conception to the last moment of natural life, that life is sacred. Absolutely sacred. Why? Because that human being, and it is a human being, from the first moment of conception to the last moment of natural life, that human being's made in the image and likeness of God. That's why there is dignity. That's why there is nobility. That's why there are rights, because we're made in God's image and likeness. Remember where the power is. Remember that no greater love hath a man but that he lay down his life for his friends. To be placed on the cross in Christ is to be set at the pinnacle of human possibilities. A hard saying, easy to talk, tough to do. You and I are going to die someday. We know that. You and I are probably going to suffer in some way. Maybe we've already suffered in many ways. That is not a negative thing. That is a positive thing. The cross is a plus sign. It is positive. It is the way God redeemed the universe. Did it end with Jesus? No. Someone, I remember one of the questions I left behind, someone said, well, how could Christ's sufferings lack anything? You know, if we, as Colossians 1:24, St. Paul said, it is now my joy to suffer for you as I fill up in my own poor human flesh that which is lacking in the sufferings of Christ for the sake of his body, the church. And the question, well, how could anything be lacking in the sufferings of Christ? The answer, nothing could possibly be lacking in the sufferings of Christ. He's God. Your intuition is correct. But remember that God is outside time and space, that his redemptive act transcends every time and every place. And because of that, at any time and in any place, when you make Christ present, you make his passion, his death, and his resurrection present. And so Jesus, the head, and you, the members of his mystical body, together carry out the work of redemption. Nothing is lacking in the sufferings of Jesus' head, of his mystical body, but Jesus, as head, wills that it be a collaborative effort between him and us, that we, together with the Master, work for redemption. Please comment on number 2277 and 2278 as it applies to no-code resuscitation or requests for not using extraordinary means of prolonging life in terminal or gravely chronic conditions. Yeah, in racing through, I didn't hit that point. So I don't think I really have to read it. I think I can hit the essence of it. We are required, of course, to take care of the sick, the terminally ill, but a point comes when people are going to die, and ordinary means are the only thing really required. Now, extraordinary means, all kinds of technology that keeps a person alive, how much of that are we required to be involved with? Well, let's say someone's dying, all right? We know that they're terminally ill. They're approaching death. And physicians and even nurses who are qualified in this area, they have a good idea when somebody's getting close to death. Now, what are you required to do? Well, you're required to feed as best you can and hydrate, water, the person. Are you required to keep them alive through all kinds of extraordinary and expensive means, special machines and so forth? No. No. Can you make a decision at a certain point in time to suspend extraordinary means of keeping a person alive? Yes, you can make that decision. What can't you do? Well, you can't stop feeding them, or at least glucose or something, and you can't stop hydrating, providing them with fluid. You have to provide that right until they die. But you do not have to keep them alive artificially, indefinitely. Now, is that some kind of exception to not killing? No, we're not killing them. We're simply saying that we accept the natural consequences of death, and we let them go. We give them what we can give them, make them comfortable. The second part of the question, also the morality of using large doses of medication for the purpose of helping to control pain, palliative care. The Catechism says it's a very special manifestation of charity. To alleviate pain is a manifestation of charity. So is it morally acceptable to give a terminal cancer patient morphine or something? Of course it is. To alleviate pain for a person in grave pain, of course, that's a moral thing. But it might even shorten their life. It can still be done. Even though it might shorten their life a little bit, it still can be done. It should be done in consultation, but that's called palliative care. The alleviation of suffering, even though the alleviation of that suffering isn't going to heal them. Giving a person morphine won't cure cancer, but it can alleviate their pain. Is that permissible? It's not only permissible, it's charitable. And that's what the Church teaches. So by all means, yes, we can do that. That's called palliative care, and it's quite all right. I am entitled to U.S. citizenship. However, to receive it, I must swear an oath before God to uphold the Constitution and all the laws of the United States. How can I in all good conscience swear that oath when that Constitution and those laws support and permit such moral abominations like partial birth abortion? It's a good question. But the Constitution of the United States never promoted things like abortion or partial birth abortion, never. And so to uphold the Constitution and authentic laws of the United States, you would oppose abortion as a citizen, a good citizen of this country. And so in professing your citizenship, you would then have a better forum to work as a citizen of the country for what you believe, to be right and moral. But this country was never founded on lack of law. This country was founded on authentic law. Roe versus Wade is not authentic law. It's the reversal of authentic law. It's the distortion of authentic law. Remember that law, in order to be authentic, has to have as its basis the divine law, God's law. All law has to have as its basis the divine law. No authentic law can ever call itself that law unless it's based on that which is true and good. Is that law concerning abortion defensible in this country? No. Does a person have to obey that law? No. Why? Because it's not law. But the Supreme Court passed it. The Supreme Court's dead wrong, and history will prove it to be dead wrong. And so the Constitution and the authentic laws of this country, which is a great country with a great Constitution, that's what you uphold. But those who are subverting and destroying this country through false laws, specious laws, laws that don't deserve the noble term of law, that's not what you're upholding. That's what you're fighting as a citizen of this country. So I would say, know what you're doing. You know, by saying, yes, I accept the Constitution and the authentic laws of this country. That's what you're saying when you're becoming a citizen. But you're not saying you're going to uphold lawlessness. And that's what things like abortion, that's lawlessness, not law. And so you can be a citizen, but then you vote. Then you vote as a citizen, and you speak as a citizen, and so you have a louder voice as a citizen. So go ahead, become a citizen. You're not doing anything immoral. I have doctors, both Catholic and non-Catholic, and mothers to tell me to put my teenage daughter on the pill. Otherwise, she will end up pregnant. If I do, does not that make me a sinner? And like telling my daughter that sex is okay. Can you please affirm that my no is the right answer? Desperate. Signed, desperate. All right. I'm going to tell you this time I'm always happy when I can tell people what they want to hear. Sometimes I can't tell people what they'd like to hear, but in this case, I can tell you, Mom, exactly what you want to hear. You're right. Your intuition is correct. Are those doctors and other mothers, Catholic or otherwise, correct in telling you you should put your daughter on the birth control pill? No, they're dead wrong. They're immoral. Now, they may be well-meaning, but they don't have a clue. They're clueless. They don't know their left hand from their right, either in morality or in raising a child. Is it permissible? No. Is it immoral? Yes. Who gets the death sentence? You do, if you promote that kind of a thing. Is the daughter more or less at fault than the mom who does that? The daughter's less at fault than the mom, because the mom is the one who should have enough sense, and the father, to know what's the right thing to do. Of course, you say, here, Susie, here's a nice prescription for birth control pills. That's a death sentence, because what it's saying is, yes, you're right, Mom. You're affirming that it's okay. Even if you say, no, I don't want you having sex, and that's wrong and it's immoral, so here's your birth control pills. No, you're right, Mom. Don't do it. Don't do it. But what happens if my daughter gets pregnant or something? Well, don't let her have the abortion that those same people will tell her to have. Clinton is out. Dole and Kemp are Masons. What are we to do? Elect Dole and Kemp, have them build you a fireplace. They're Masons. I don't know if they're Masons or not, but I'm not going to tell you who to vote for. That's one thing I don't do. I can't do that. I can try to help you with the principles that can guide you, but I never say, vote for this, but that's not my business. You can vote for anyone you want to vote for. You're free, but what I'm telling you, vote a Catholic conscience. Make sure you have a well-formed Catholic conscience, and then follow it. then vote for whoever your conscience tells you to vote for. But I don't tell people, oh, vote for this one or vote for that. I never do that, even if it's eminently clear. I especially don't do it when it's eminently clear. And often it is. But it's up to you. Whoever you vote for, that's who you vote for. But I hope I can help you, give you some principles that can help guide your conscience. In light of what is happening in the media, television, etc., and their responsibility to serve society, can you touch on the responsibilities of the media and, more importantly, the moral obligation we have as parents in providing good programming and so forth for our children? That's a good question. And that's, again, there are many things. You see how dense this material was I presented. I didn't really touch on that. It's an enormously important thing. See how the questions can fill in what I've left out. There's no question that we can take this under the fourth commandment in our responsibilities as parents, the responsibilities of the civic authorities. The media have power, enormous power, for good or for evil. And so, yes, it is of great importance that programming in the media be wholesome and be good. I'll tell you something, you could never have what's tantamount to pornography on television if the people in this country didn't want it. I mean, if the people in this country raised a hue and a cry and said, I'm not going to buy any product from any sponsor of any pornographic or near pornographic program that goes on television, if you sent that message, if 60 million Catholics united sent that message to NBC, CBS, and ABC, I guarantee you would see a totally different thing on television. And so it's important, and you should exercise your influence in that respect. You know, there are good things. Thank God for cable, you know, in recent years. It used to be we were kind of prisoners of the main networks, and now there are many other things, and some of them can be good. I don't, use this as a forum for promoting things, products and so forth. That's not the position, but this concerns the faith, and so I have no fear of doing it. EWTN, Mother Angelica's network, I'll tell you something. You may not like Mother Angelica. She might be too tough for you or something, but I'm going to tell you something. She is doing, and well, what all the bishops together couldn't do. And no offense to any or all of the bishops, but there is no Catholic television network, much less from a satellite in outer space beaming all over the country, the gospel. Nobody else has been able to do it except a little nun in Birmingham, Alabama. And so that's very important. And so whether you like her or not, that's your business. But I tell you that the programming on EWTN is solid, it's reliable, I recommend it. You will never find any false teaching on there. You don't have to worry about watching it, that you'll get the wrong thing, your children. It's good stuff. My mother watches it at home. I watch it whenever I can. I'm even thinking about getting one of those satellite dishes so I can see our friend Mother Angelica. It's a good thing. And that's an example, by the way, of Catholic action in the media. That's a perfect example of how the media and technology can be used to promote the good and the true. In other words, the gospel. Okay, now, abortion. Since our state and national legislators make it legal by statute for persons to have abortions, this is a form of formal cooperation. Do they incur excommunication, late sententiae? Well, some of you ask excellent questions, tough ones too. And if I didn't know you better, I think some of the questions you ask me are specifically geared to have my head amputated. However, I answer those questions. Since our state and national legislators, here's what we're talking about, our state and national legislature. I will add to this, our Catholic state and national legislators. Okay, you didn't put Catholic, but I think you meant to. Our Catholic state and national legislatures make it legal by statute for a person to have abortion, this is a form of formal cooperation. Do they incur excommunication late sententiae? Okay, I'm going to give you, I'm a priest, I'm a theologian, I'm a doctor of theology, just like a lot of those people on the other side of the fence. What do I think? It's my opinion, because, you know, it doesn't say, it's not written out in the Catechism specifically that the Catholic legislators in the United States incur, you know, it's not written right out. But I will tell you my opinion on that, and I will argue it in front of bishops, priests, or anybody else. Yes, yes, they incur late sententiae excommunication. And I'll go a little further. I always like to get in a little trouble. It is a grave disservice, even though it would be late sententiae in virtue of the act itself, by promoting that heinous crime. A grave disservice is done to the people of God when it isn't clarified. When a Catholic senator or legislator votes consistently against life issues, when he votes in favor of abortion and even partial birth abortion, and there isn't a word heard from anyone, that's a gross disservice to the people of God. It sends a message that, well, maybe it's okay. Hey, if the senator can promote abortion, what's wrong with me having just one? After all, he's promoted millions. He didn't get excommunicated. Bishop didn't say a word. I tell you that history will record that the cowardly silence that facilitated this evil is one of the worst ever to be recorded in history from beginning to end. You will see that one day, probably in heaven. But to remain silent, especially if you're in authority, priest, bishop, to remain silent in the face of that kind of gross moral evil is in itself an evil. So yes, I feel that they are excommunicated late sententiae. I believe that's true. Whether or not some others in higher positions than me would believe that, I don't know. But that's what I personally believe, and that's a defensible position, believe me. That's a tremendously, eminently defensible position in theology. Probably someday I'll get a chance to prove it. What would be an example of using the death penalty in society in cases of extreme gravity? How does this, in the 1990s interpretation in the Catechism, balance with "you shall not kill"? Well, now you have to understand that the death penalty does not fall under "thou shalt not kill." It falls under, yes, the fifth commandment, but it's not killing. The death penalty is not taking the, remember the definition. Definitions are important. Taking of the life of the innocent. Okay? In the first point, the criminal's not innocent. Okay? He was tried and convicted. He's not innocent. But, as I tried to point out before, you say, how does this 1990s interpretation in the Catechism balance? Well, it's not killing, because we have to define terms. What we mean by killing is murder. You know, it's taking the life of the innocent. Punishment of a criminal is not murder. Punishment of a criminal is allowed. It's always been allowed by the Church. A commensurate punishment, a punishment which is commensurate with the crime. Now, as I said, I made clear that in the 90s, in Western civilization, the Pope and the bishops have stated that these conditions scarcely exist, where we need to impose the death penalty on people, even for murder or things like that. So, true, depends. Now, at another time in history, maybe we didn't have the means to rehabilitate them, to incarcerate them properly, whatever the case may be. So the Church says, yes, governments do have that right to impose even the death penalty under certain circumstances. They have that right. But we go on today in our space and time, the 1990s, and say, we don't believe that those conditions happen to exist today. Now, you can argue that back and forth, but the only point I want to make, I'm not taking one side or the other. I'm just saying that under the Fifth Commandment, the Church states that governments have the right to impose penalties on criminals up to and including the death penalty. Now, whether or not that's appropriate at a given point in history, well, that's something that has to be worked out by those in authority. Father, I am struggling with the limitations of God. I know God is supreme over all. He created the universe, all on earth, over the earth, under the earth. Many places we read that certain things or all was planned before time began. We have good and evil. God created Lucifer, etc. Since God is all-powerful, he could have had Adam and Eve remain in his grace as his children, etc., etc., etc. Could you explain this? Well, yeah. This is the mystery of evil. Now, God is all-powerful. God has no limitations, okay? It says it, underline here, limitations of God. God has no limitations, otherwise he couldn't be God. God is unlimited. God is infinite. God is eternal. God has no limitations. God can do anything and everything he wants. But you say, well, God can't do evil. Right, that's outside his nature. But that's not a positive thing, that's a negative thing. God can't do evil, but that's not the nature of God. God can do positive things, not negative things. Evil, by definition, is the privation of a due good. God's not deprived in any way. He's the fullness of all things. But then in the light of that God's good, all right? That God created everything. How come evil? Why the devil? Well, God created everything good in the beginning. Everything that God created, he declared good, very good. All the angels were created good. Now, some of the angels, Lucifer, some of the angels that rebelled, they fell from grace. That's where the demonic comes from, the devil, Satan, the evil spirits. Did God create them evil? No. God created them good. There's not a primordial good and evil force. That's a heresy, Manichaean dualism, very ancient heresy. God created everything and every bit of it is good. But because of the abuse of intellect and free will, some of the angels fell. And so we have then the battle between good and evil. Well, if God's good, why does he allow it? Why would God allow us to go to hell? Why would God allow all the evil in the world, all the suffering, the pain, the misery, the oppression? Why, if God's good, does he allow such evil? I spent most of my last 12 years in the church pondering that question. That's what my doctoral thesis was on. Day and night I prayed about it, I studied, I read hundreds of books. And after all of that, I'm going to now give you the benefit of all that. After all that, I do but one thing and point there. That is the answer to every pained questioning of the human heart. Why, God, if you are good? Why do you allow bad things to happen to good people? Jesus is true God and true man. He is perfectly innocent, and yet he suffered the worst evil imaginable. That crime is called deicide. Creatures murdered the Creator. Jesus is God. It is God who assumed a human nature and took it to the cross. And so the suffering of Christ is where we have to look to see the answer. Why did God allow that if he's good? The simple answer, only to bring a greater good out of that evil. The good of redemption. And so you look at the universe and you see all the suffering in your own life. Why does God allow that? To make you a saint. That's why. God has ordained all things in order to make you a saint. He's given you obstacles to overcome, pain to bear, a cross to be lifted up upon. God allows evil in order that he might bring a greater good out of it. That's the answer to that. And that, by the way, is the only answer to that. There is no other answer. You can search down 10,000 times 10,000 roads in this life, and you will never find another answer to that question. You must look at the intersection of the beams of the cross. There, you will find the answer to every question concerning evil, pain, suffering, death, all of it. Father, I understand that one who procures an abortion incurs excommunication, lati sententia. However, if a legislator, here we go, who professes to be Catholic and votes for abortion, does he, she incur the same excommunication? Well, you know the answer to that one, at least in my opinion. Yes, I feel that they do incur that excommunication. If one advocates for the death penalty in appropriate circumstances, are they violating any magisterial teaching, sacred tradition, or any the deposit of faith, or both? No. No, I told you that. You read that again in the Catechism. Now, it's for the Church, the bishops, and the Holy Father to interpret that at any given age in history. But the teaching of the Church for many centuries has been that governments do have that rightful authority to impose just, commensurate penalties for crimes committed up to and including even the death penalty. Now, whether or not that should be applicable today, that's up to today's leaders. That's up to the Holy Father and the bishops, and they have basically said, not today, not in the affluent West, not when we have better ways to do it. Let's put it this way. I don't want to be the guy that pushes the button, okay? I don't have a strong position. I used to be very strongly, well, we need the death penalty. Not anymore. I don't go one way or the other. I tend to say, well, look, the Holy Father said it doesn't fit today. There are other ways. And I tend to say that must be right. I'm not smarter than he is. I'm not smarter than the bishops. And they have advocated for the abolition of the death penalty. But you can't say that church teaching doesn't allow for the death penalty under certain circumstances, because it does allow and always has allowed for that. However, whether or not that's appropriate right now, today, in this country, that's another question, and that I defer to the bishops and to the Holy Father in that, and they say, look, not today, it doesn't fit. I agree. I have to admit that, somebody made a point, well, what if they're innocent, and you get the wrong guy? Well, that's happened. I think that's happened, and it could happen. And I wouldn't want to be responsible for that. So if there's got to be another way. I'm not saying we've come up with the best way. I don't think we have. We need to work very much on our prison system and how we can work on this terrible problem of crime. Regarding euthanasia, when someone is close to you and is terminally ill, and would perform euthanasia, and you knew she talked about it, does that constitute excommunication? No. There's no automatic excommunication. Let's not get, don't get the idea that you get excommunicated for anything and everything you do, or for even thinking bad thoughts. It doesn't work that. Very, very few things result in automatic excommunication. People, when they're in pain, can desire an end to the pain. That's understandable. God, even civil law, realizes that people can be under duress. And duress mitigates the circumstance. Under duress, somebody has a gun to my head, I might sign a contract that I wouldn't ordinarily sign. Well, the civil law even recognizes that duress, that's a factor that influenced me. Well, God, who knows all things, certainly understands that under the duress of grievous pain and suffering, a person may say, Lord, let me out of this. I just can't take this anymore. I want to die. I understand that. So if I understand it, how much more does God understand it and sympathize with the person? And we all sympathize with that. But that's not an excuse to give in and to collaborate in what the Catechism calls a murder. A murder. It's taking the life of the innocent. It's playing God. I know there's a temptation to do it. I have had loved ones, friends, that I've watched them die slow, painful deaths. Boy, that's a hard thing to look at that. And you want an end to their suffering. I even pray for it sometimes. Oh, Lord, please take them. You know, take them home to yourself. Haven't they suffered enough? But I always do it in a sense, God, you know better than I do. I'm not God. How do I know when enough has come? Only God knows. Maybe that person is expiating for the sins of someone on the other side of the globe, and God wants to save that person's soul through that loved one who's in union with Christ, suffering on that cross called cancer, or whatever it might be. I don't know those things, but God knows those things, and God orders all things to the good for those who love him. If someone is in a coma or only being kept alive with tubes, okay, I answered that one. I have a friend who believes and has told my son that anything goes in the marriage bed so long as it ends in the transmission of life. Well, I'm not quite sure what everything means. You know, when you're dealing with theology, you have to be precise, you know. So don't stand up and tell me, by the way, what it means. But, you know, let me just give a basic teaching on that. In the expression of human sexuality, the husband and wife, they express their love in a mutual way that the normal called foreplay, as we say, that leads towards and is consummated in natural intercourse. That's okay. Mutual masturbation, things that are done for their sake in themselves, that don't lead towards natural consummation in the marital act, natural intercourse, that's not permissible. In other words, some of these things that might classify as foreplay, if they're done in and for themselves, and, you know, apart from sexual intercourse, no. But when they're part and parcel of the overall lovemaking that moves towards natural intercourse, then it's acceptable. And so, you know, I can't define and go through exactly what the term everything means. So I'm not going to attempt that. But I hope that helps a little bit. My 37-year-old brother is a homosexual. I have received the Eucharist at communion for all of these years on earth so that the Lord will have mercy on him. I pray daily for my brother, that the Lord will forgive him and change his life. I love my brother. Is there any more I can do? My brother believes in God, but rarely goes to church. I always have to tell you the same thing that I tell everyone, and it's the answer of St. Ambrose to St. Monica. When St. Monica came crying over her son, St. Augustine, and she was afraid he was going to lose his soul. Augustine was living in sin, right? Living with a concubine, had an illegitimate child. St. Monica, you know, a saint in her own lifetime, holy woman, went to St. Ambrose, Bishop of Milan, and cried for her son. Oh, he's going to hell, you know, and I'm fearful. And St. Ambrose looked at her and said, oh, my dear, no son of that many tears could ever be lost. And so I say to you, no brother of that many tears or prayers could ever be lost. And in virtue of your prayers and those of the rest of the church, God will grant a grace to your brother in due time, and your brother will turn completely to the Lord, and the Lord will heal him. And so never despair. It's never too late. There's no sin too bad. God loves all people. God loves homosexuals. God realizes that they have a difficult cross to bear. But God wants all of us to pray for each other, that we might bring down the grace on all of our brothers and sisters. I am my brother's keeper. And if my brother's problem is a struggle with homosexuality or alcohol or drugs or anything else, I am my brother's keeper, and I must pray for my brother, give him good example, be compassionate to my brother, be open to my brother, help my brother, and suffer for my brother if I must, in order to bring God's grace down upon him, that he might then eventually turn to the Lord, and the Lord might heal him.